Hi there, it's Alex Woodsey. I'm a financial litigator and I'm here to talk to you about the wonderful world of compound interest, which is actually being called by Einstein and others the eighth wonder of the world. And the context in which I am waffling on about compound interest to you today is PPI claims and whether or not you may suspect that you have been shortchanged in your payment protection insurance claim against your bank if you're a consumer. And I'm also going to delve into the law a little bit and try and demystify the law in this area, compound interest on damages in the courts, for those out there who are of a professional or specialist bent, such as solicitors, claims management companies, insolvency practitioners or others who may have a sneaking suspicion, like I do, that the banks, the lovable banks, are ancient institutions. I've been a member of Lloyd's for 20 years, ever since I was plopped into a chair by my grandfather and given my first chequebook with Mr. Alan Minter, I think his name was, in Lloyd's High Street branch in Colchester. All our lovely traditions and institutions are under the microscope this afternoon as a result of this video bulletin. And the specific area that I am targeting is the bank's rather appalling failure to properly compensate people in full for missold payment protection insurance. There you go, that's the introduction. I am a financial misselling solicitor. If you haven't realised from this website, or if you've seen Rip Off Britain, you may have seen me for 30 minutes of fame on Rip Off Britain, pontificating on the PPI scandal, etc, etc, etc. Go and read up on the video or somewhere else about me to test my credentials. I have come about this video because I have been contracted by what I consider to be quite a professional and responsible claims management company, which may be something of a paradox to many of you out there, but there are professional people out there who run claims management companies who've asked me to do an audit on all their clients because they've developed this sort of sneaking suspicion that they haven't been getting full compensation in respect of, relatively bog standard PPI claims for fixed term loans and credit cards. So I am going to talk to you about a couple of cases because unfortunately their suspicions are corroborated by my own. In fact, I've got a couple of cases here because as a solicitor who litigates claims, has been successfully litigating claims, I hasten to add, over the past 3 to 4 years, and have been in the courtroom arguing these points against credit card companies like MBNA and Creation Financial Services. I've got two cases here, two recent cases I've just dug up that I prepared earlier. One in which, against the Royal Bank of Scotland on behalf of a consumer, in which the Royal Bank of Scotland and NatWest have made an offer of, this is a letter for action, by the way, this is a shot across one's opponent's bows, and in this case the lender in 2012 made what I consider to be an incredibly derisory offer of £1,531 to my client. I'm afraid consumers see the money and they take it and they don't really analyse whether the quantum is sufficient. I've done a spreadsheet. I've been, as I say, litigating these cases a while, and I've put it through this eighth wonder of the world, a compound calculator, rather than what the banks have been doing for the past 3 or 4 years, ever since 2008 and the scandal broke, is a simple, emphasis on the word underline, underscore, put in italics, bold, capitalise the word simple, interest rate. God, I feel like Patrick Moore. Remember that crazy astronomer? Simple interest. Right. What I've done is I have compounded the repayments that the consumer was required to make under this fixed term loan, under this credit card agreement on their balance. I've compounded the premiums on the credit card and arrived at a grand total of £29,707, which is rather a lot more than £1,500. Here is an MBNA case, same old story. Made an offer of £3,142 at the end of September 2011. And in this case, the consumers actually was really appalled and immediately smelled something fishy and wrote to MBNA and said, I want all my statements, I want the original agreement, I want to calculate the amount of payment protection insurance refund that I'm entitled to myself, thank you very much, and sent off a Data Protection Act request to the credit card company, which was ignored. Call me a cynic, but surprise, surprise. And anyway, I've come up with a quantum of 16,699, which is, again, a lot more than what they were offered, 3,000. They had the gall, MBNA, to simply make the award, rule on the mis-selling, stick the refund of 3,000 on the credit card, and there was an outstanding, the balance was about £2,000, and then send a cheque for £1,000 to the client. Here's your refund. Take it or leave it was their attitude. So I'm afraid their suspicions have been corroborated by my own. I'm now going to talk to you about Sempra Metals, because in part the banks can be forgiven for taking a simple 8% calculator approach to the award of PPI, because the sea change in the law that I'm about to come on to is relatively recent, and for a couple of 100 years judges have not been minded to accurately reflect and recognise the time value of money, and if you've ever wondered why you've got credit cards are bombarding you with applications, or they have done over the years, if you've ever wondered why it is you can have such access to free money, well, the answer is they're making so much profit on the basis of compound interest calculations on your £1,000 balance over 15 years or whatever it might be, that they can easily do with a couple of default. They can easily stomach a couple or a couple of 100,000 defaulters. So so they can be forgiven for thinking that they can get away with simple 8%, statutory 8% of interest awards on PPI refunds. Sempra Metals. Now, Sempra Metals was a German manufacturing company, and they were charged corporation tax, advanced corporation tax, by the Inland Revenue before they were required to pay it, and they parted with that money, and they suffered the loss of that money. And there was no issue over the fact that it had been wrongly charged. They'd been required to pay this tax at the wrong time, much earlier than they should have paid it. The issue was simply, and it went all the way up to the House of Lords, the highest court in the land, in 2007. Lord Birkenhead gave the leading judgment, and it went all the way up there. And the question was, is it really in today's climate, in today's commercial climate, in which the experience of Joe Public is not just companies, not just corporations, not just manufacturing companies, but consumers? The reality is that wherever you turn, if you borrow money, you will be compounded. You will have to pay a compound interest rate invariably on borrowing money, on an overdraft or indeed a credit card. So they felt that in order to give effect to that, the law had to change. And this has been a major sea change. And whilst it's been applied pretty much comprehensively by lawyers in the land in respect of commercial cases, it hasn't really trickled down into consumer cases until now. But it is a statement of clear principle, and it is the intention of the highest court in the land that it be applied. So Sempra Metals won their case, and the Inland Revenue did have to pay compound interest on the award. It was a claim in restitution, so it was a slightly different basis of claim, but exactly the same principles apply. Now, in our case, I mean, you couldn't think of a more obvious candidate for the application of compound interest than a consumer who has, over a long period of time, suffered under the burden of a loan, under the burden of debts. And as Sempre Metals pointed out, the significant thing is, whilst they were paying, in the case of payment protection insurance claims, and in our case I'm specifically referring to fixed term loans, whilst the consumer was paying a whatever £50, £100 loan repayment each month in respect of this missold PPI loan, they were suffering quite possibly, and I would say this would be perhaps the majority of people who had fixed term loans, they were suffering with the burden of credit card. Most people have had credit cards, and they might well have been suffering a burden of credit card with the same lender. So the true loss to them, and don't forget we're talking about the time value of money here. We're not talking about the PPI premium and the associated interest on the loan that's payable each month, for 5 years, or however long the loan is. We're talking about the fact that that money has been taken from the consumer back then in the day, and the cases I'll come on to, the loans were taken out in 2002. And now, 2013, 10 years later, there needs to be a time value compounder on that award, on that settlement, on those damages. And of course the banks, until quite recently, have been simply applying simple 8%. And I could refer to you here, I've got some paperwork here. I'll have a shuffle whilst I'm proceeding with this video. Here we are. You see this is a standard breakdown provided by a bank. I don't know if the video can see it very clearly, but break it down into boxes here. The PPI policy premium, the interest occurred due to PPI. This is the amount of interest charged during the course of the PPI policy. And then here we have it, 8% per annum simple interest. No thank you very much. If I've got a credit card throughout the period of that loan, then thank you very much. And indeed, furthermore, let's say the credit card is actually with you. I am paying you compound interest at a credit card rate each month on that credit card, and you've been robbing from me the £50 or the £100 a month that I've been paying toward a PPI loan which you've unlawfully missold. Don't forget, I am talking generally here, specifically here rather, about fixed term loans, okay? And you have been missold by the banks, and the banks have admitted that they've missold and they've paid you a refund, and you've got a big question mark over whether or not that refund is enough, or whether or not you've been shortchanged. So that's the approach that the banks have been taking to interest to reflect the time value of money in respect of PPI refunds. Okay, so now the two remaining and concluding questions that you may have are, number one, well, surely this can't be happening. The banks can't be wholesale shortchanging the great general public. That's the first question. The second question, well, just exactly how much money are we talking about here? What sort of effect does a compound interest measure on the time value of my PPI refund? What difference does that make than if I use a simple 8% measure on the time value of money? Okay, so to answer the first question, well, I kind of have already answered it. I'm a civil litigator. I come across these cases during the course of litigation and also during the course of advising claims management companies. And I'm yet to advise banks, but I'm hope in time to be able to consult the banks as well. I'm a lawyer. I'm not partisan about this issue. Some banks have behaved well, some banks not so well. And I think you can tell from those two earlier examples that certainly in the case of MBNA and one in the case of Royal Bank of Scotland, and I'm afraid that I've got another example that I've not produced for you today in the case of Barclaycard, And I'm afraid I've been in court with MBNA a couple of years ago on this issue, and with Creation of Financial Services, and it's like drawing teeth getting them to ultimately pay the correct form of compensation. In fact, I spent a whole day in central London County Court in June a couple of years ago, arguing with the barristers at MBNA. So I'm afraid that the banks are not paying out the proper compound interest on top of PPI awards, or at least not all of them, and certainly not historically. I think they are. The penny is beginning to drop, however. Anyway, that's really the answer to the first question. I hate sounding like a cynic about this whole issue, but I don't know how else to put it to you. The banks, I mean, in fairness to the banks, they are struggling under the weight, or they have been struggling under the weight of, very poor looking balance sheets, huge bills, prospective bills for scandals like PPI. And it's the nature of any corporation, commercial animal, to want to limit its costs, and paying out PPI refunds is just yet another cost on a bank that's already in trouble, or has been in trouble over the past 5 years. And I'm afraid that Lloyds have actually removed, after the Times did an undercover sting on their PPI complaints department, removed the contractor who was responsible for setting up that PPI complaints department, because they were using sharp, dodgy practices, and they were shortchanging or ignoring clients' claims. I'm not even worried about libel, should anybody from Lloyds be listening to this video bulletin, because it's out there, and the stats are out there with the Financial Ombudsman Service, that the majority of Lloyds' complaints on appeal are overturned. I think the figure's something like 80%. So I'm afraid that the banks have been doing a very bad job of refunding clients the missold PPI. So to conclude with, the $64,000 question, well, how much, if I am a consumer, and how much, if I am a specialist or a solicitor, or in my case a consultant who's doing an exercise for a claims management company, how much difference does compound measure, the time value of money, to account for the time value of money on my PPI claim make? And I have got two cases here which were at the top of the pile. I haven't totally cherry-picked them, but they are a more promising sample, let's say, of two people who've had loans, one with Barclays, both with Barclays actually, although I've got some Lloyds ones, but these just happen to be, no, hang on, this is a Barclays and this is a Lloyds. And in the case of the Barclays one, I've done a additional simple interest calculation on, so I've kind of actually restructured the approach that Lloyds have taken to the refund in this case, and just to check my figures. And the refund in this case, on the basis of simple 8%, is $5,292. If you apply, the loan incidentally ran from 2002 until 2005, and having done a compound interest calculation on it at the credit card rate, the approximate credit card rate of the bank, we arrive at a figure of 14,743. That's the Barclays one. In respect of the Lloyds one, we have a figure, again, it's a loan for just 5 years, 2002, same time. On the simple interest calculator, 5,583, and that is the amount that the client actually got. And you can find in this bundle, you'll find the breakdown that Lloyds have supplied with the offer letter. Putting it through a compound interest calculator at the credit card rate that Lloyds were charging the same customer during the period of his loan, 16,081. I mean, that's what I would consider to be quite a startling insight into the way that compound interest actually works, particularly over time. One of the most interesting things about compound interest is the way that if you sort of draw it as a curve on a chart, it accelerates. It's sort of like a little bit exponential. So over a small period of time, and there are some cases here where it's not quite so noticeable, over a smaller period of time, it just is doing that, and it may turn your 1,000 into 2,000 over 3 or 4 or 5 years. But if you're kind of running for 10 years, let's say, it can suddenly start shooting up, and that's why you see, and it's just it's just the magic of compound interest. And, you know, give Einstein the last word, compound interest is one of the 8th wonders of the world. There it is, that's the end of this video bulletin on demystifying compound interest in financial mis-selling claims. If you have a fixed term loan and you want to email me or put a comment on the website about this issue, then I'll be very happy to hear from you. My email address is info@redwoodlegal.co.uk. Thank you very much for listening, and you know, do look seriously at this issue if you think that you're not being offered full compensation by your bank or credit card company.